And today's subject is titled Women and Islamic Law. This is part A. Since the age of Islamic reformation in the 19th century, numerous attempts have been made to improve the position of women in Islam by reformulating sharia law in the light of social change and modern developments. And yet, to our knowledge, not a single study has tried to propose legal reforms by exploring the dialectical relationship between straightness and curvature and human legislation, and by studying this relationship in consideration of the human natural disposition, al-fitra. We hope, therefore, to start our investigation into the possibilities of legal reform with the notion of Allah's limit, which not only stipulates boundary straightness, but also allows human legislation the freedom to move and change curvature. We can see three major reasons why previous attempts to radically reevaluate the situation of women in Arab Muslim world have failed. In their study of the mother of the book, al-Kitab, jurists have failed to distinguish between verses that stipulates Allah's limits and verses that are purely informative and legally non-binding, suggesting only good practice. Also, in their study of Muhammad's Sunnah, they confuse compulsory with optional categories of law. In more general terms, they simply overlook the existence of limits in Islamic legislation. In defense of medieval scholarship, we might say that their understanding of hudud Allah was bound to be rather primitive, and that their scholarship could not significantly improve before the introduction of Isaac Newton's revolutionary theories, which gave Allah's limit a solid mathematical underpinning. It was only after the introduction of Newton's theory of limits that forthcoming generations of scientists were able to study phenomena in nature and link them to the limits that Allah has set for human societies. However, current Muslim scholarship cannot resort to this excuse. After centuries of progress in the natural and social sciences, we are now able to apply the legal impositions of what is straightness and what is curvature in line with what is inherent in nature and disposition of human being, thus allowing us to embark on a truly contemporary and enlightened assessment of the situation of women. Based on our rereading of the book, 1. Feminists have failed to envisage a struggle for the liberation and emancipation of women that goes beyond the time of Muhammad's life. In their attempt to prove that Islam is non-misogynist, Islamic feminists have too often focused solely on how Muhammad's mission has liberated women in ancient Arabia, while more or less ignoring the plight of Muslim women ever since. By doing so, they have unintentionally suggested that the liberation of women achieved under Muhammad was the optimum of emancipation possible, instead of the beginning. And since during Muhammad's time, women were not working as judges and preachers, and since they did not occupy high political position, this was seen as the maximum amount of women's liberation that we today are not allowed to further extend. This ignores, of course, the fact that the position of women in Arabian society was just like slavery, which initially had to be endorsed, something that did not allow radical changes, or, to put it evolutionary terms, something that did not allow a sudden compulsion of entire time periods. Just as a sudden abolition of slavery would have destroyed the social fabric of the prevalent means of production in ancient Arabian society, a radical repositioning of women's role would have undermined the social stability that Muhammad so desperately wanted to achieve with his new state. The society which Muhammad created was Islam's first, but not only model, Islam's first fruit, so to speak. Muhammad's political and legal decisions were deliberately positioned between Allah's limits and constantly adapted to the spirit of his time. At times he enforced Allah's limits vigorously, and at other times he allowed old conventions to continue if their practices did not violate God's law. Such conventions, however, prevented women from doing what they would do today because it severely limited the opportunities of women to fulfill public roles. In some areas, however, for example, as advisors to political leaders, in community administration, or during military campaigns, the remarkable public position of Aisha or Khawla bint al-Azwar demonstrate that the new religion inherited a structural imbalance, but did not exclude women from public affairs per se. An example, only because they were women. One should not forget that the first death, or as widely known martyr for the sake of Islam, was Sumayya, a woman, and the first believer also a woman, Muhammad's wife, Khadija. And yet we must not think that woman's emancipation ended with Muhammad's reform of ancient Arabian society. What is needed today is to understand his messengerhood and the verses of the mother of the book and their dual capacity to both absorb the prevalent historical conditions of Muhammad's time and encompass subsequent developments that allow much greater emancipation. Muhammad's reform were only one small, albeit not insignificant, part of a much wider scheme of women's liberation. 2. Exegetists have failed to correctly identify the meaning of the Arabic term nisa, which often has been too narrowly understood to mean women only. The importance of redefining this term is immediately apparent when we look at the following two verses. Fair in the eyes of men, nas, people in Arabic, is the love of things they covet. An-nisa wal bunun, two words thus written in translation incorrectly as woman and sons. And the verse continues, heaped up hoards of gold and silver, horses branded for blood and excellence, and wealth of cattle and well-tilted land. Such are the possessions of this world's life, but in nearness to God is the best of goals to return to. Al-Imran 14. Nisa'akum, pardon me. Thus it's understood again as your wives are as a tilth unto you, so approach your tilth when or how you will, but do some good act for your souls beforehand, and fear God, and know that you are to meet him in the hereafter, and give these good tidings to those who believe. Baqarah 23. If we still insist, as generations of exegetists did, that an-nisa can only mean women or wives, we have entered hermeneutically and intellectually a cul-de-sac that cuts us off from a progressive flow of history. In both verses, chapter 3:14 and chapter 2:23, if nisa is rendered as woman, they can only be seen as no more than a commodity for men, the possession of this world life, or a piece of land to be tilled when or how you will. A first step to avoiding such misogynist rendering is to accept the fact that in speaking of women and men, Allah used different terms when he refers to them as A, biological beings, and B as female, or A as biological being and either male or female, or B when he refers to them as cultural beings or possessive morality, consciousness, and the ability to rationally reflect on their social and cultural environment. Examples are as follows: that he did create in pairs male, dhakar, and female, untha, Najm 45. And of everything we have created pairs, zawjain, that you may receive instruction, Dhariyat 49. O mankind, as translated, Ya ayyuhan nas, we created you from a single pair of male, al-dhakar, and a female, al-unta, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know each other, not that you may despise each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of God is he who is the most righteous of you. Al-Hujurat 13. We have honored the sons of Bani Adam. Al-Isra 70. In the first and second verse, Allah speaks about his creation in pairs, which include not only men and women, but everything that is either male or female. And that includes animals and plants that, unlike humans, do not possess the capacity to think and reflect. Biologically, women share the sex with other female creatures by receiving the semen of male species, by becoming fertilized by the male sperm. by giving birth after a period of pregnancy and by nursing their progeny. Men are of the opposite sex, which they share with any other male creature on the earth. There are the biological partner, Zoj, of the female with whom they form a relationship of natural correspondence for the purpose of procreation. In the third and fourth verse, Allah speaks not about males and females, but about humans, men and women, who by having Allah's Spirit breathed into them are able to think rationally and act consciously. In all those instances in which Allah addresses humans as rational beings in the Quran starts with the exclamatory "O humankind," implying that no distinction is made between male and female. In other words, Allah honored both sons and daughters of Adam, regardless of their biological status, on the basis of the good deeds they perform for the benefit of all humankind, provided that the right historical circumstances are given. We believe that women are as capable as men to occupy leading positions in state and society. It is our endeavor to completely revise the notion that men are inherently superior to women because women lack rationality or because they are spiritually inferior to men. Now, towards a contemporary understanding of fiqh jurisprudence for women, our aim is to correct these three failures of traditional jurisprudence and to present a truly contemporary understanding of fiqh jurisprudence for women, based on the notion of a lex liminalis in Islamic legislation and on the belief that the legislative verses of the book are valid for all times and in all places, allowing both flexibility and elasticity, the development of history and the demands of human society. In contrast to the legal codex that Moses brought to his people, which contained more than 600 concrete laws or legal injunctions, the legal verses of the book contain less than a tenth of this number. The reason for this sudden reduction in the number of legislative verses is, as explained previously, the change in the nature of Muhammad's messengerhood from a legal system where all laws are specific and punishments certain, to a legal system which only provides a universally applicable legal framework in the form of upper and lower limit straightness, between which legislators formulate diverse particular laws, curvature. This new legal system works like a field whose borders provide the outer boundaries between which human legislation take place. In some instances, law may not even touch these borders. In other instances, boundaries may be touched but not transgressed. And when the book states that these are the limits imposed by Allah and warn people not to disobey Allah and His Messenger and transgress His limits, it is clear that His intention is to declare the limit-based character also of Allah's law of secession. We will observe three fundamental principles in determining a law that moves between the boundaries of God. 1. The legal instrument of analogy, qiyas, must only be employed if comparisons are based on what is empirically manifest, shahid, and not, as traditional jurists claim, on what is hidden, al-ghaib, that which has its root in the past and cannot be proven empirically. Acceptable empirical data are, for example, statistics and current birth rates, the percentage of women currently employed, or the distribution of wealth, and the per capita income of a society's current population. These data constitute the external criteria of credibility from which textual analogies are drawn. 2. Internal credibility is achieved through analogies and comparisons between textual passages of the book based on the dialectical notion that underneath the thematic unity of verses and surahs and ideation, polarity of mutual opposition and duality exists. 3. The verses of the book are never repetitive or, worse, redundant. The divine text does not allow synonymity between words. In cases of textual ambiguity or grammatical inconsistency, it is always a word's semantic meaning that explains and determines a word's occurrence in the text and not style, rhyme, or other rhetorical consideration. 4. We believe that ijtihad must be performed in all legal areas, and that every ijtihad should tackle the explicit legal text message nas that the book provides, following our maxima that there is no ijtihad outside the text nas. With the help of these principles, we now re-enter the legislative arena and explore issues such as inheritance, polygamy, guardianship, dress codes for women, and other issues of family law. Bequest and inheritance law is next.